in one sense, I'm extremely happy about that. In another sense, it's like, man, there's a lot of dysfunctional people out there. You know, if people around the world are attending this, at least it's just not a homegrown issue or disease here. It's worldwide, and people are benefiting. I actually go to a meeting once a week in Istanbul. I used to live in Turkey, right across the Bosphorus Straits from Istanbul. And so I'm just impressed and amazed at how this program has grown. I'm really grateful that you all attended today and that we've got some Zoom members attending. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and it's something that I struggled with for many, many years. And maybe some of you have had a similar struggle, and that's about forgiveness. Forgiving individuals in my life, and I'll get a little bit more into this in a minute, but forgiving individuals in my life that caused a tremendous amount of trauma in my life and impacted my adulthood in a way that I was unable and incapable of maintaining a healthy relationship. And so the more that I discovered about why I was struggling, the more angry I got about the people in my past, because I had denied it was even an issue. I just thought the way that I grew up was the norm. I didn't know that it was dysfunctional because it's all that I knew. And so as I got into recovery and I began to hear stories of other, I was a counselor at the time in a treatment center, and I began to hear the stories of other counselors about what they were struggling with. I began to realize that this issue, for one, is not going to go away just because I wanted to. And two, that I was probably going to need help to get through this. And some of the issues that I struggled with was pretty severe abuse and trauma as a very young child, beginning at 4 and 5 years old. And because of some of the abuse that was perpetrated on me at that time, as an adult, I was incapable of having intimate relationships with other people, men as well as women. My men friends were just guys that I hung around that, you know, we were into addictive behavior. And I would seek out men that had that same addictive mentality. They were the funnest for me to hang around. And the women that I chose to have in my life at that time were women that were, one, unavailable, because I was unavailable. I didn't want an available woman. I just wanted somebody I could just be with and make my life seem okay. And I called them 90-day wonder relationships. After 90 days, I wondered why I was in the relationship. You know? I literally began to look for somebody else after I'd already been in a relationship for just 90 days. I began to pick apart the person I was with. They began to pick apart me because my dysfunction came out pretty quickly. And the closer that my significant other wanted to be, the farther I would run. Emotionally first, and then at some point physically. I just had to vacate the situation because I just didn't know how to do it. I found that I was angry all the time, and I didn't know why. I'd go to bed angry, and I'd wake up angry. I was like, why am I angry? What is the problem? And other people were pointing out my anger before I was willing to recognize it. You know, I had people that I worked with. I had my own little business, and employees would just, at some point, give up and say, you know, you're just too pissed off all the time, and I don't want to work with you anymore. And so I'd have to find somebody else and replace them. And I would, and once I had kids, I was like, kids brought out the worst and the best in me. The best in the sense that I never knew a love like that. And for those that have had kids, I think you might understand is it's instant. The first time I held that child, my first child, I was like, that was a love that I'd never experienced. And that just continued to grow. And I've got 4 adult children today that I'm incredibly close with. The relationships with them that I never had with my folks. My mom died in December, and we hadn't spoke for over 36 years. And that was her decision, you know. So there's pain and suffering that goes along with codependency. And with that codependency and with that pain and suffering, some of us, not all of us, but some of us begin to act out in real unhealthy ways. And we come into CoDA typically, I've never seen anybody come into CoDA on a winning streak and feeling real happy about life. Most of the people that I've ever met that showed up to CoDA had a tremendous amount of pain and suffering that they were carrying along. And very often they didn't even know how deep that pain and suffering went. And the more they stuck around, the more they realized, wow, I'm really not well. And I learned that in CoDA by being around unhealthy people. They began to teach me how unhealthy that I was. And then the more I began to recognize that and break through the denial, then all of a sudden I had to find a way to get well. And getting well back at that time, we didn't have the steps. We didn't have the beautiful big book that we have now. We didn't have any of the literature. It was flying by the seat of our pants. All of us were recovering in AA. So we decided to start using AA principles and program to try to get our lives better, but specifically dealing with family of origin and the people in our lives. And that was very, very painful and difficult for many of us. I know for me, I spent the first 8 years in CoDA in therapy as well. And in therapy, I did this inner child work. And I was a therapist time, but I'd never even heard of that terminology. And began to have to go inside and deal with that little broken child that was inside acting out in my adulthood. That little child wanted to be recognized. He was sick and tired of being neglected and abandoned, not just by my family of origin, but by me as well. And I didn't even know that I was doing it. So as this became clearer, I had to start getting into some kind of recovery, dealing with my past as well as my present, and confronting very, very difficult and painful issues. And the more that I confronted those, the more that I realized at some point in my recovery, I was going to have to get into some forgiveness. And when it was suggested to me, the first time that it was suggested to me by my therapist that I was going to have to find forgiveness for those that have perpetrated and abused me, I had some choice words for the therapist. I was like, no way. They don't deserve my forgiveness. They don't even deserve to be in my life or be a part of my life. And that was my family of origin. I was willing to say no, never again, and absolutely leave that family. By that time, I was building a family in AA, and they became the people that I went to, that I normally would have went to my mom for or went to my dad. It just wasn't there for me. If I went to them, they would just tell me how stupid I sounded and how ignorant I was and just get over it. Anybody ever been told just get over it? By the time I got in this program, one more person that said just get over it. I was going to have another resentment. And that resentment was going to come out right then. I couldn't just get over it. I had to go through it. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to go through it. I didn't want to relive it. As I continued to resist that, I acted out in behavior that was unhealthy. For instance, addictions. I found solace in addictions to people, places, and things. I have an addiction called addiction to more. That is my main addiction to more. Anything that caused me pleasure, I wanted more of it, and there wasn't enough of it for me to get. I would seek out anything that created pleasure in my life to an extreme, and it would push people away, it would push situations away, it pushed jobs away, because I needed more. And people can only give so much. Jobs can only do so much, but I needed more. And so ultimately, my dysfunction would cause those relationships to end. I would move on. So I decided I'd go into business for myself. As long as I'm my own boss, I can give me more, right? I'll just go to me and say, I need more. Okay. No other boss was willing to do that. So I stayed in business and built a small remodeling business for 35 years. The only one I had to put up with was me. And the employees give me grief. There's the door. Real unhealthy. You know, I just found ways to live as an adult to avoid having to confront my past. My past was and is to this day the most important thing in my life. It makes me who I am. The problem is I was living only in the dysfunction of the past and not learning and becoming healthy from the past. My dysfunction led to me being a wonderful counselor. I was incredibly empathetic and sympathetic with people that came into our treatment center that were in pain and suffering. I would say, I understand, I get that. I relate to what you're going through. And most people, when they first come around, they don't think anybody's going to relate to them. Nobody's going to understand their set of problems. And what I found out as a therapist, I could take my degree and just throw it out the door, because I was reaching people much quicker by being a recovering codependent than I was as a counselor. And in the beginning, I had other therapists and directors that would say, you're talking too much about your personal stuff with your clients. Really? Yeah, you've got to have some boundaries. You guys ever heard of boundaries? And then there was talk about things like enmeshment. I was like, in what? Mesh? What? Enmeshment? What the hell is that? You're losing yourself and your clients. You're losing yourself and other people. You got to maintain who you are. I was like, that was just like speaking Chinese to me. I don't know what you're talking about. So slowly but surely, I began to see how my behaviors as a therapist, as well as the behaviors in my personal life, that I was enmeshing myself and other people rather than having healthy boundaries and healthy relationships. I would lose myself in other people by looking for myself in other people. I would look for happiness and joy and expect you to give it to me. And the second you argue with me about anything, I'm done with you. Anybody relate to that? You know? And people wouldn't understand. It was like they'd say, my wife would always say, you know, you're so distant. If you say I'm distant one more time, I'm going to get distant. You know, and I was like, I just didn't get it. What are you talking about? You're emotionally unavailable. Anybody ever heard that? Emotionally unavailable. I'm emotionally off the wall. Well, no, you have two emotions, anger and denial. What? I was like, happiness was doing insane behaviors. I would only get happiness from being crazy in my life and doing really risky behavior. Anybody ever do risky behavior? Get lost in just behaviors that would just take you out of real life and put you in a place that was unbelievable? Everybody came here to hear about forgiveness. I hope so. What we're going to talk about first, however, is something called forgetness. How many of you have ever been in a situation that you just wanted to forget it, like it never happened? Anybody relate to that? Anybody have a childhood like that? I know when I left home, there's a lot, most of it that I just wanted to forget. And I did. I did through the kind of behavior that I exhibited in my life, as well as addictions. And it took me out of that until it didn't. It created a tremendous amount of more pain and more sadness in my life as a result of the addictions. I continued to run from my past through my 20s and 30s. Even though I got into recovery programs, I still was struggling with looking inside and identifying what needed to be healed. And what I found out is the trauma and the abuse of my past will not heal by just ignoring it. It doesn't go away. I had a therapist one time tell me, you can continue to change your relationships, but every single one is going to be exactly the same dynamics. And it's like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to divorce this one and get another one. And he was right. It was the same thing over. I used to tell people I've been married 3 times, but it was the same marriage 3 times, just 3 different people. But it was the same exact process. The dysfunction was there in the beginning, the obsession, the need, all of that drive. And then all of a sudden, I didn't want it. And that's why I call them 90-day wonders. I didn't know how to do it. Other people had successful relationships. I used to watch families and their kids and they're all getting along and they're happy. And I was like, I don't get it. Why can't I have that? And it was impossible for me to have that because of carrying my past into those relationships. I was carrying the same old dysfunction into those relationships. As I got into recovery, I found out that not only do I have to confront these issues, I've got to forgive everybody that was involved, including myself. That was not something I was interested in either. If you knew me the way I knew me, you'd never forgive me. And I was judging myself on even the way that I thought about things. Things that would come into my mind that was like, where the hell did that come from? But I would judge myself and become even more ashamed of who I am based on how I thought about myself and based on the relationships that I would create that ultimately ended in people being upset. And so I would blame myself. On the exterior, I was always pointing at you. You're the problem. My boss is the problem. My customer is the problem. My ex is the problem. My kids are the problem. I was real good at seeing the problems in you and identifying those. I was real terrible at looking at myself. So I began to do that. Anybody here have to confront your past or confront who you are? Have to walk through that? For me, it wasn't a pleasant trip. I had done a lot of damage to me. I think I'd done quite a bit more damage to me by the time I was in my 30s than was ever done to me in my childhood. I was abusing myself in so many different ways, emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. I was abusing myself and I didn't know it. I really didn't know it. I thought it was other people that were doing it to me and causing me to react. And that if I just had nicer people in my life and a better spouse and children that listened to what I had to say, then life would be better. And it never gets any better. Just because I can control people and get people to do what I want, I was still miserable. That misery led to the acting out. That acting out led to me having to get well. As a result of me getting well, I had to learn to forgive myself. For me, the number one thing I've got to do is become forgiving of myself and other people if I want to have happiness. Otherwise, I live in resentment. AA teaches in their program that resentments are what? Number one offender. Why? Why are they the number one offender? Resenting something else or somebody else. Because what? You can drink over it. What's that? Beat yourselves up even more. What else? What will resentments do? Cause you to obsess. About what? About the resentment. For me, I obsessed on everything and anything. I was considered a worry wart. Anybody here worry warts? Worry about everything? And then I look back on what I was worrying about 6 months ago and I was like, why was I worried about that? But I continued to worry, even though I knew it was unhealthy. I want to start, now that I've shared a little bit about myself and where I think this is going to go, is I want to start by giving you an opportunity to just drop everything mentally that's going on with you right now. Just let it go. Find some peace in where you're at right now. Anybody have any tension going on? Any stress in your life at all? Everybody stress-free? That's great. I like that. You know, we've got everything from our experience with COVID, our experience with life, our struggles, all that stuff. Most everybody that I know deals with stress. So what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to drop some of that right now. So as we get into this, I'd like to have you start out and begin this with being a little bit stress-free. So if you're willing to participate in this little exercise, it's just about relaxation. It's about focusing on exactly where you're at and what's going on in your body, what's going on in your mind. You want to participate with that? Okay, good. So what I'd like you to do is just get in a comfortable seating position. Try not to have your legs crossed or your hands crossed or anything else. Just let your arms hang. Let your feet, both feet on the floor if you can. I'd like you to let your head hang down and close your eyes. I want you to focus right now on clenching your toes and your feet. Just clenching them as tight as you can. And hold that just for a few seconds. And then release them. Then I want you to try to flex your calves. Lift your feet up slightly and flex your calves real tight and hold on to them. And then relax them. Now I want you to do it with your thighs. Tighten them up as tight as you can. Hold them. And just relax, let them go. Now your glutes, your bottom. Tighten it up tight as you can. Hold it. Hold. And relax. Now your stomach. I want you to tighten your stomach as tight as you can. And just hold it. And then relax. Now your chest. Tighten your chest up so you feel your back and your chest tighten up. As tight as you can. Hold it. And relax. Take your hands and squeeze your hands like fists together as tight as you can. Real tight. And then let them go and relax. Now I want you to bend your wrist down and tighten your forearms. Real tight. Just bend your hands forward and tighten your forearms as tight as you can. And then let that go. Now I want you to do it with your face. Clench your teeth real tight. Close your eyes as tight as you can. Squint real hard. Just let that go. Now I'd like you to take 5 really slow but very deep breaths. Breathe in and exhale. And breathe in and exhale. And breathe in and exhale. One more time. Breathe in and exhale. When you're ready, you can come back to the room, open your eyes. If your neighbor fell asleep, just give him a little shove. Okay. How many of you have been in a position in your life that something occurred and you just wanted to just forget it? Try to forget it, like just want it to go away. Don't even want a memory of it. Anybody willing to share that experience? What your experience was? And there in that sentence is the challenge for being so stupid. Was it stupidity that caused that relationship? I would caution anybody when you're looking at your past, no matter how dysfunctional it was, that you label yourself in that process. The experience may have been awful. Just don't make yourself awful because you participate in an experience. There's nobody in this room that hasn't had an experience, I would guess, that you look back and say, wow, I was really stupid. And what it was a mistake. I have to change my vocabulary if I want to recover. I can't continue, and we'll get into this in a minute, I can't continue to make critical statements about myself, about things in the past or even things in the present, if I want to recover and be healthy. Healthy people do not spend time demeaning themselves or labeling themselves with negative terminology. That is not healthy. I lived like that most of my life. It's called shame-based behavior. Anybody ever heard of that? That as a result of situations that happened in my life that I was a part of, I was ashamed of me. And as long as I'm ashamed of me, I cannot have a healthy relationship. The two do not go hand in hand. Anybody else want to share what they've tried to forget or situation that you wanted to forget, or maybe you did forget for some period of time? And what occurs in situations like that is we know it's unhealthy. We know what's going on is not right. Yet we still have this tendency as codependents to walk away feeling like somehow we were responsible. Somehow we allowed it to go on longer than it should. Somehow it's our fault. Anybody ever get that message in your childhood that the reason you're miserable or the reason you're in trouble, it's your damn fault? I left my house at 18 years old and joined the military, and all the dysfunctions in my house, I was the middle child, the scapegoat. And I acted out a lot. I was acting out the family dysfunction. Did I know that at the time? No, I thought I was having fun. I was doing things to myself that were horrible. I was tearing myself up. And yet, I thought it was funny. I was the class clown. Anybody have class clowns in here? Yeah. If I could make people laugh, they wouldn't get close to the pain. I wouldn't ever let them get that close. Who else has got something in their life or experience they want to forget? Yeah. Sorry you experienced it. I have yet to meet anybody in CoDA that hasn't had trauma and abuse in their past. I may meet that person someday, but I'll ask them at that time, why the hell are you in CoDA? I brought you here to be amongst us. I have found solace in CoDA because there are people that understand what I experienced. At an emotional, mental, physical level, they understand, they get it. That's my people. That's my family. When I hang around, let's call them normies, that haven't had those experiences, they don't understand why I act the way I do and why I react the way that I do. You know, my reactions and my actions have a lot to do with what created me, how I developed. And I've spent my entire adulthood trying to change a lot of those behaviors. You know, this is my 40th year in AA by the grace of God. And the reason I went into AA was not because I drank too much. I had quit drinking 2 years before I went into AA. I just happened to know this guy that was a carpet cleaner. And he was an old ex-cowboy, and he was the kindest, most gentle, most wonderful person that you could ever talk to. And every time he'd come to a house that we remodeled and cleaned the carpets for me, I would ask him all these questions. How do you do it? How do you stay happy? Are you always content? You always have really nice things to say, these little cliches. He goes, you know, I wasn't always like this. I used to drink too much. And when I stopped drinking, I didn't change much. I was still a rotten person. And I started going to these meetings, and those meetings taught me how to be a different person. It's like meetings that taught you how to be a different person. And I'm in my mid-20s at the time. And he said, yeah. He said, they really helped. Matter of fact, there's one this night. It's a Friday night at this little clubhouse. If you want to go, I'll meet you there. I didn't tell him I was going to go. I figured I'd sneak in, see what they were talking about. And if I didn't like it, I'd get out. So I walked in and I sat right by the door. It's like, okay, I'm going to listen to this for a minute. And then I'm reading all these little signs around there, one day at a time, and easy does it, and all these signs. I was like, they had no meaning to me whatsoever. They were cute, but so what? And then this guy gets up to speak at the podium, and he goes, my name's Chuck, I'm an alcoholic. I looked over at him, I was like, what? I'm not an alcoholic. Why am I here? And he said, after the meeting, why did you drink? Well, why does anybody drink? And he says, well, why did you drink? I said, because I like the effect. I like it, what it did for me. He goes, yeah, that's what alcoholics do. I was like, I'm not one. So I snuck into that meeting for 6 more months. And at the end of 6 months, 2 guys, he walked up and they gave me this blue book. And they had written in inside, signed their names and all stuff. And they gave me this blue book. And they said, you know, if you're going to be quoting this book, you ought to have one. I was just repeating quotes that I had heard in meetings over the last 6 months. So I was trying to sound smart, like I knew, you know, I'm Mr. Recovery now. And I was misquoting everything. I said, what you're quoting is not exactly in the big book, but here's one we want you to have. And I still have that big book today, 40 years later. What I found out is that my drinking was a way of trying to forget. My drugging was a way of trying to forget. At 5 years old, when a 5-year-old's being forced to do sexual acts, that is not normal. And I grew up thinking it was disgusting, but it probably happens in other houses, but it's just something we don't talk about. You know, I'm sure my friends have experienced something similar, you know, but I'm never going to talk about it because this is the stuff we hide. And I continued to act out dysfunctionally as a result of what was going on in our home. My uncle came to visit. He was an alcoholic truck driver, came to visit and forced me to do things to him when I was 7 and 8 years old. And by that time, I'm like, this must be normal. I've got to make them happy. Because once I participated, all of a sudden, they treated me wonderfully. Bought me stuff, took me to ice cream, all kinds of stuff. And I thought, this is normal. But I'm never going to talk about it. And I held those secrets until I was in therapy over 30 years old before I ever talked about it. As a matter of fact, I had forgotten it. Maybe you can relate to this. I was terrified of spiders growing up, and I didn't know why. Arachnophobia times 10. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why. Even a daddy long leg, I would just freak out. I'd scare the hell out of him. I could not be around him. I couldn't even step on one and kill it. I was that terrified. So I'm in therapy in my 30s. I'm working with a therapist that does Jungian therapy and Freudian analysis, and he's a wonderful therapist, and he takes me back to a dream that I had had that was a reoccurring dream. And in the reoccurring dream, there was always this big black spider that was freaking me out, that I couldn't get away from. He had me go back into the dream, go up and embrace the spider. Now, when he first told me that this is what you need to do, I opened my eyes and said, no, I'm not going to do that. He says, okay, when you're ready, we'll go into that. So I did it. A couple of weeks later, I decided I want to find out what this is about. So I was willing to do it. I go into the dream and I go and I embrace the spider. And as soon as I put my arms around the spider, a clear, vivid memory came back where I was being sexually abused at 5 years old, that I had covered up, that I had completely forgotten about. And I put it in a spider. I put that memory in a spider so I'd never have to think about it again. Amazing how our minds work. Amazing how we deal with trauma as children. It's amazing how we'll compartmentalize it somewhere in our brain so that we don't ever have to think about it again. We won't ever have to remember it. The problem is, does it have an effect on you in your life? Does it impact your life as an adult? It absolutely does. I had so many behaviors that were coming out as a result of trauma and abuse, and I had no idea that there was correlation of why I was doing what I was doing to myself. Why I was treating myself so bad as an adult is because I was ashamed of me. I drank it myself. I drugged it myself. I abused myself because I lived in shame, shame-based behavior. Ever heard of it? It's a lot of real good books about shame-based behavior. If you've never read them, I really suggest it if you're in CoDA. Because until you get rid of that shame, which is shame that a perpetrator put into you, it's their shame. Their shame that we have that's normal and it's a healthy feeling. It teaches us about humility. That's what healthy shame's about, to keep me humble so that I don't live in a way that is unhealthy and dysfunctional. That's healthy shame. But when I'm not, when I'm available and I'm abused or I'm traumatized, I'm taking the perpetrator's shame and making it my own. That's why when people are raped very often, the first thing they want to do is what? Take a shower, because they feel what? Dirty. Have you ever heard that? They feel dirty. That's how I felt in my entire childhood. I felt like there was something wrong with me and that I was dirty and that I was sick, and I carried that right into my adulthood. It's real hard to have relationships and expect people to like me or to love me when I am ashamed of myself. And yet I would expect them to, and I would get mad when they didn't. I want you to love me so that you'll fix me. And yet I couldn't love myself. When I really got down to the bottom line, I didn't feel like I was lovable. Anybody relate to that? Ever had that experience? Because of where I came from and experiences that I had that were traumatic, that I wasn't aware that I was even doing this, is I blacked out those memories. I put them in compartments that I wouldn't ever go near because I was terrified of them, spiders. And yet it would come back in my dreams and haunt me. And it was just saying, I need to be healed. And that's what it was all about, is I need to be healed. I was wounded. And so when we get wounds, they require our healing. And I had no idea how to do that until I started hanging around people in recovery and Codependence Anonymous, which led me ultimately to therapy. And I confronted those abusive situations in my life and realized that they were impacting me 20 and 30 years later. I've worked with people over my time as a counselor that were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that were carrying shame from their childhood. And they had no idea of why their lives were so destructive. And it was like destroying themselves because they felt unworthy. I remember the first time that I did that inner child work, I literally could see colors better. Everything was brighter. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is wild. And it was cleaning away all of that garbage. And then my life brightened up, literally brightened up. Our minds are incredible in order to protect us. What our minds, what our brains will do to protect us. Anybody ever been in a horrible accident and then just couldn't remember what happened? Have a tragic accident, like maybe a bad automobile accident or, you know, a beating from somebody or somewhere where you just black it out. And I know that it happened, but I can't recall exactly. That's our brains trying to protect us. If I have to remember the exact incident over and over again, it's hard to live life. So I will just shut it down. I shut down everything before I was 18. How do I know that? Because when I was in the military, I was trying to think about my childhood and I could not recall anything other than that we were a military family, we moved all the time. But as far as exactly the things that were happening and what I was doing, I couldn't remember. It was totally blacked out. It wasn't until I became willing to do this work that all of a sudden I was shedding light on this, but it was painful. And I'm glad I had a therapist to guide me through it. Had I not had that therapist and tried to do this on my own, I think I would have self-destructed or got into more self-destructive behavior. Because a lot of my behaviors were self-destructive and they were on purpose, but yet I didn't know I was doing that. I had no idea that I was trying to destroy myself because of my own shame about who I am. And that shame wasn't even mine. There's things that the mind does, like, have you heard of disassociation? I'll disassociate from it so I don't have to remember. Or blackouts, I'll completely black out what happened. Or just straight denial. Anybody ever use denial? One thing that I know about denial is that it only works for a short period of time. And as long as I'm denying something in my life, I am denying who? Myself. And so if I begin to deny myself, what are my behaviors going to look like? What are my actions going to look like? They're going to become more abusive of me. I cannot deny myself if I want to live in the present and be present and have life. Anybody ever just go through the motions, just living life, just going through the motions? Is that living or is that surviving? It's just surviving. It's funny, when I went in the military, you know what my job was? I was a survival instructor. I never put that together until I was in my 30s. I'm like, I wonder if I chose that on purpose. Another way of forgetting, and I don't want to spend too much time on this next one, because it's a very difficult topic for a lot of people to talk about. When I was 11 years old, I took an entire bottle of Tylenol to try to kill myself. My mom had said to us kids, this was her way of preventing her kids from taking things out of the medicine cabinet and taking too much. She said, if you take more than 7 of any one pill, it'll kill you. That was the way that she instructed us kids so that we wouldn't take more than 7 pills ever. I took the whole bottle of Tylenol. And I laid in my bed and I was ready to die. I'm just laying there, 11 years old, crying in bed by myself, waiting for those pills to kick in so that I'm dead. My mom's calling me from another room and I don't respond because I'm waiting to die. She comes into the room, she sees the Tylenol bottle on the floor. There's no Tylenol in it. She goes, what the hell did you do? And I was just crying and she goes, what the hell did you do? And then all of a sudden my stepfather walks in. He wasn't a very pleasant dude. He was that got really screwed up and he had no idea how to raise children. So his only thing is I beat you or I ignore you. That's how he raised us. And so all of a sudden he picked me up out of bed and he started shaking me and, what did you do? What did you do? And I'm screaming, nothing. I just took some aspirin. Where'd the whole bottle go? I took them. So they rushed me to the hospital. They put some stuff down my throat. I don't know if you've ever drank the stuff. It makes you throw up. Oh, I don't know what even, it's ipecac or some stuff. You drink it, it just makes you barf. So I did that. Most of the pills had already dissolved in my stomach. So they said, if he's not dead yet, he's probably not going to die. He's probably going to be fine. They took me home and I was grounded for 3 months to my bedroom. That's how they dealt with me attempting suicide. They grounded me for 3 months in my bedroom. If he stays in his bedroom, then, he's not going to go out and get in trouble. Strange. Suicide is something that people will do when they've had enough. They've had enough. And at 11 years old, and then again, as an adult, when I lost my son and wife to COVID, the 2 times that I tried to take my life, I think I failed. At least I'm still sucking air and I'm getting up, but I failed because there's another plan. That wasn't part of the ultimate plan. So I survived both times. Today, I'm grateful for that. Especially, I'm grateful for my kids for that. I have an incredibly loving relationship with 4 children. For them to think that their father took his life would be a horrible thing for them to deal with. So I'm glad I was unsuccessful. But I've been at that point, and that is a terrible place to get to. Most of the people I've met in recovery that I've ever talked to, especially those I've sponsored, have been there. I'm sure there's some people in this room that have been there. And it's one of the most hopeless, helpless places you can ever be. I know for me, if it wasn't for you people and your open arms, I wouldn't be here in front of you today. I lost my reason for surviving. The most beautiful thing is, though, is you continue to open up your arms despite that I wanted to take my life. You opened up your arms and said, it's going to be okay. That's all I needed to hear. It's going to be okay. Because when you're living in that disparity, you don't think it's ever going to be okay. All I knew is that it was never going to be okay, so why continue? The devastation that that would have done to the people that love me. When I think about that, I am so grateful that I had somebody intervene who I choose to call God. Had I been left to my own devices, I think I would have succeeded. But he had other plans for me. He wanted me to do this presentation, apparently. The consequences of forgetting are fourfold. When I try to forget, there's mental consequences that I'm going to suffer. There's physical consequences I'm going to suffer. There's emotional consequences and there's spiritual consequences. And I want to look at each one. But before we do that, I'm going to allow you to take that little pee break because of all the coffee and the water you've drank, and give you an opportunity for the next 10 minutes to take care of those needs. And then I want to start into the consequences of forgetting. So let's take a 10-minute break. All right. Welcome back. What I'd like to do now is get into some of the specifics about forgetting. What I do remember is that I didn't want to remember anything before I was 18. Being raised with my stepfather, being raised by a mother who wanted nothing to do with me because I resembled the man that got her pregnant. They just wanted to ignore me and make me go away. And so from the age of 0 to 18, I never, not one single time ever, people have a hard time comprehending this, but it's my story. Was there a hug or a kiss from my mother or stepfather? And my real father left when I was 3. I didn't meet him again until I was 25. And so the 3 people that were supposed to have the most influence on me, the 3 people that typically, for most of us of children, become our first God or gods, is our parents. That's the first higher power that most of us have. And if that higher power abuses their relationship with me, then I go out into the world and I'm told, you got to believe in God. That's really important. When I came into recovery in my 20s, you got to believe in a higher power, God. And I was completely opposed. I said, absolutely not. I didn't know why I was so opposed at the time. I didn't discover that till later. But when your first higher power or higher powers are abusive, and then later in your life, you're asked to believe in this loving, caring God that you can't see, feel, touch, or smell, why am I going to do that? That was frightening to me. I'm not going to believe in something out here. I'm not going to pray to something out here. I was born again literally in 11 different churches. And every pastor would just say, well, the last one didn't take, Chuck. Let's try this again. And I was just trying to get fixed and get well. I read every self-help book, whoever it was, I read them and I read them and I read them because I'm going to fix myself. Anybody ever try to fix yourself? What an endless struggle that is, right? And I would really believe that I was making progress. I'd read a book and was like, that's the answer right there. Yeah. Bill knew exactly what he was talking about. Knew exactly who he was talking about. I'm just going to apply these things to my life and then I'm going to be okay. Anybody ever try that? Or what about go to school and become a counselor, become educated, get a degree in psychology? Then I'll be able to figure out what's wrong with me and how I can get better. I think 80 to 90% of all of my college mates were trying to do the same thing. And then as I became a counselor and then later on as a program director and I was hiring these people, I found out that they were still looking to fix other people in an attempt to fix themselves. 80 to 90% of the therapists that I hired and worked with, and I was one of them. It doesn't say much good about the field of being a therapist, but it's true. It really is true. Why else would you want to go to a job that you just hear people's problems all day? There's got to be some motivation to do that. My motivation was if I can fix them, then I can surely fix me, right? I continued to fail at those attempts. I really had to go back and heal this little kid. And the first time I heard about inner child, I was like, what new mode of therapy is this? That just sounds ridiculous. And then when I would talk about that, when inner child work was brand new and you would talk about that to other therapists or just common lay people, they'd look at you like you were absolutely insane. You're talking with your inner child? What? It was the most healing therapy I've ever done because that little kid was demanding attention. And because I wasn't giving him the attention that he needed and deserved, I, as an adult, was acting out like a kid that's being neglected and abandoned. Children that are neglected, abandoned, and abused almost always will act that out in some way through harming others or self-harm in 100 different ways. If I wanted to stop harming myself, I had to get down to the reason, the causes and conditions that were creating that within me. If you would have asked me back then, and I wasn't asked, I was just told that I was going to go into this therapy process because the guy that I was going to be working with was a very dear friend of mine. And he says, you got to do this work. And I didn't want to. I was very resistant. I couldn't see any benefit of, you've heard this, digging up the past, reliving the past. Why would you do that? It hurt the first time. Why do you want to go back in that? That is the only way that it could be healed, is to begin to talk about that and make real what happened. A lot of it, I was trying to forget. And the mind is an amazing thing. It can forget trauma. Right when it happens, it can black it out. And sometimes it doesn't come back to regular memory. Sometimes it doesn't come back at all for some people. Sometimes it doesn't come back into the 40s or 50s, and all of a sudden, it's coming out of their life. They say that women typically, by their 40s, that have had an abusive childhood, by their 40s, it really begins to come out and cause dysfunction in their life. Men, it's typically in their 50s. We're a little bit slower, guys, than the women are. And I know for me, I started having to deal with this stuff in my late 20s because I'd already been married and divorced. I already had kids that I was struggling being close to. And I tell this next story because I want you to understand what trauma can do. to an individual that's trying to be a parent. When my first son was born, he was 30 days old, infant, in his crib. Some of you parents are aware of what this thing called colic is. Colic of baby. What does a baby do when it's colicky? Just screams and cries and screams and cries because they're miserable. They're hurting. I'm working literally 7 days a week, 100 hours every week, building my business. I'm exhausted. I have to be up by 4 at the job site between 4:30 and 5, get the crews going, and I'm usually the last one to go home at 5 or 6 in the day. Beat, tired, exhausted. Go home, eat, watch TV, try to go to bed. Well, we have a newborn. Newborn doesn't care about my schedule. Newborn doesn't care that I'm tired, I'm exhausted, that I'm rich. It doesn't care. They're very selfish little children. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, my son is screaming and crying, and my wife is sick. She's feeling miserable. She goes, "It's your turn." No, I can't deal with that. Honey, I'm sick. I'm miserable. I can't go in there and be with the baby. Please go be with the baby. So I begrudgingly get up. I go into the baby's room. In the crib, there's this child screaming. I pick up the child and I do everything that I've ever done with this child that makes him go back to sleep. I put him in his bassinet. I put it on the washing machine. I turn the washing machine on. That little vibration almost always puts him to sleep. Screaming. I pick him up. I walk around the house. I rock him. I shake him. I sit in the rocker. Screaming. I know it will work. Every time I put him in the car seat and go for a drive, he's out. I'm going to go for a drive. 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, I put him in the car seat, turn on the car, start driving around the neighborhood, screaming, blood curdling screaming. I said, all right, that's what you want to do. I'm just going to put you back in the crib. I'm going to close the door and you just scream your eyes out. So I put him back in the crib, start to walk back to bed, screaming, louder than ever. I was like, oh my gosh. I've been doing this for a couple hours now, wanting to get back to bed, knowing I've got to be up in an hour or so. I go back in the room, I pick my child up. And who in this room's ever heard of shaken baby syndrome? Before I had children, I didn't believe in God. But one prayer that I did send up and was hoping somebody would hear is show me how to be a father because I don't have a clue. When my wife first told me she was pregnant, I was scared to death. I did not want to repeat with my kids what had happened with me and my brothers. And I swore that was never going to happen. I am not going to be that person. 30 days old. I pick him up out of his crib and I said, his little head, back and forth, back and forth. And I don't know what or why he stopped, other than that I think it was scary. He stopped crying. And I didn't know if I had broke his neck, if I had hurt him, if we squeezed him. I didn't know what I'd done. But he was just looking at me. And I set him in the crib. And for the first time in my adult life, the first time, I fell on my knees. I started bawling and crying like he was. And I said, God, I don't know how to do this. Please show me how to be a father. My prayers were answered. Very slowly, but they were answered. I will tell you that I have 4 adult children, stepdaughter and 3 biological boys, raised them all since they were children. My daughter since she was 4. All 4 of them are extremely, to this day, extremely close with me. We spend all kinds of time together. I have a granddaughter who is the love of my life. She is the most beautiful 9-year-old that I've ever seen. Spoken like a true grandfather, I hope. No child is as beautiful as this child. And she's the sweetest thing. I only begged and wished that I would have had something half as close to that when I was a child. But I remember that prayer. God, show me how to do this, because I don't know how to do this. And my kids are all very successful in their adult lives. They're doing extremely wonderful. My daughter's had my only grandchild. I mean, it's incredible to watch them. But I made the decision that I know some of you in this room have made, or you wouldn't be here. This dysfunction stops with me. If I pass some of this on, I'm going to at least acknowledge it and say I'm sorry for it, which I've done that with my kids on many different occasions. I never, ever heard a single sorry from my stepfather, my father, or my mother. Not one sorry. Nor in the 18 years that I lived at home did I ever get a hug or a kiss. And I couldn't stop hugging and kissing my kids until they made me stop. I'm dropping them off at school and they're 7, 8 years old. I'm giving them a kiss. Stop. There's other kids around. You're embarrassing me. I just want to kiss them even more. That kind of love is absolutely incredible. It's that love that helped me overcome the lack of love that I had in my childhood. The ability to receive unconditional love from my children. And I have failed in so many different ways as an adult and as a father. And you know what? You'd never know it if you've seen how my kids treat me. They think I walk on water. I've tried. I fell right in. They think their dad is just the greatest. I would have never, ever thought that that was possible based on where I came from. So I say that to you, and I say that to your kids and your grandkids, that it can stop with us. We just have to make that decision that it stops now. And then I had to acknowledge my dysfunction and how I have harmed my own kids. Because it wasn't until then that I could make my amends, that I could start letting the past go, not forgetting it, but letting it go. When I do not face that trauma of my childhood, the primary way that most people deal with it is trying to forget it. And there's a lot of ways that we do that. Every way that we try to forget our childhood causes consequences in our life. And this is the part I really want you to hear. If you want to deny any part of your past, or you want to try to just forget about it or just black it out, you will suffer consequences as a result of that. And I want to review some of those consequences. And I will tell you, as a father and as somebody who grew up in an abusive environment, I've experienced and done every one of these. I have personal experience with every one of these consequences as a result of wanting to forget the past and just not deal with it. The mental consequences, cognitive decline and mental health issues. The mental health issues that I acquired as a result of the childhood that I grew up in is I was given the diagnosis of being a depressive, having anxiety issues, and being on the border of being a borderline personality disorder. And having been a therapist and treating those, that's the only client that I didn't want to treat. They're a very difficult client. So when somebody told me, you've really got some strong borderline characteristics. I was like, well, I'll just change therapists. I don't want to hear that. And the fact is that it was true. The other fact about it is that a lot of those mental health issues become issues as a result of where I come from. I developed those mental health issues as coping mechanisms to get through that. The only thing is I got through it and it doesn't serve me as an adult. It gets in the way of me being a healthy adult. So I had to begin to confront those issues. And I did so through men's groups therapy, in individual therapy, in Codependence Anonymous, and putting away all of my addictions, alcohol, drugs, gambling. And once I put that stuff away, then the only thing I had to look at was me. No more escaping, no more running. I had to face what was causing these things in my life. And again, I hear all the time, and I did as a therapist for 25 years, I heard all the time, I do not want to dig up the past. No. I do not want to confront that. There's no need. I'm past that. I'm over it. It happened. So what? I forgot about it. And my answer was always the same. If you get a wound and you don't treat it, the wound doesn't go away. And you may not know how it's impacting you or affecting you as an adult, but I can assure you, if we look at your behaviors as an adult, you will begin to see patterns that come out of the abuse of your past. You can't just tell your brain, oh, I'm just not going to pay attention to it. I'm just going to forget it. Doesn't work that way. Some of the ways that shows, other than cognitive decline, is difficulty in concentrating. I remember trying to read a book. Maybe some of you can relate to this. When I was in college, they made me do all this reading. I'm not a reader. Because I would read a paragraph or two and not remember anything I just read. Anybody ever struggle with that? Read a page or two, read a paragraph, read a chapter. I was like, what did I just read? I couldn't focus on what I was reading. And I didn't know why. I just thought there was a defect in me. I just thought there was something wrong with me. Everybody else could study and read and pass their tests. And I would read it and just not remember anything. And so I began to fail at college, which made even more shame about who I was. Why can't I do this? Other consequences, emotional consequences. The first emotional consequence is the inability to have and form healthy relationships as an adult. Anybody ever struggle with those besides me? You know, I mean, I'm educated. I got my degree in psychology. I'm a therapist. Why is my relationship at home so miserable? I know better. And yet I could not apply my knowledge to my relationship. There's a saying in a program that I attend, knowledge avails me nothing. Ever hear that? If I said that to my oldest son, who's a brainiac, he just says, Dad, you're so far off base. Knowledge avails you everything. I was like, no, not so much. Knowledge about my dysfunction doesn't do anything for me. Getting down and healing what caused that dysfunction is the only way out. The way that most people that I've ever met initially want to resist. Anybody ever resist dealing with your past? Now, who wants to deal with that stuff, especially if it was traumatic? Why do you want me to go back through that? I've already been there. I've already done that. I went through it once. I don't want to deal with it again. And what I would tell them is the same thing that I had to go through. And that is, if I don't go and heal those wounds, they will continue to impact my adult life in an unhealthy way. I will continue to act out in unhealthy ways, even though I know better, even though that I know that I'm doing it. That sense of powerlessness and hopelessness can cause some people to get to the point of saying, I'm done. I've watched it happen as a therapist for all those years. I've watched people just get to the point that I don't want to face this anymore. I'm done. I've been there. As I said earlier, my first time of getting there, I was only 11 years old. What 11-year-old tries to commit suicide? Furthermore, what 11-year-old tries to commit suicide and then gets grounded for 3 months? I can't comprehend that. But it made sense to my parents. If we just ground him to his room, he can't hurt himself. And he can't affect the family reputation. So in the military, anything that I do on the base or off the base and get in trouble for, the commander goes right to the parent and lets them have it. Keep control of your kids. This doesn't look good. And so my stepfather would come home and said, what happened today? My company commander sat down and chewed my ass. Well, why would he do that? Because you broke into the school and broke one of the floor buffers, which is we used to get on them and write them, because as they spin, you just write them like when you're bored as a kid, you'll figure out fun stuff to do somehow, And then when that got old, we'd break in there and we'd open up one of the trampolines and jump off all the mats onto the trampoline and then jump off the trampoline. Well, you're not supposed to do that either. Matter of fact, I don't even think we were supposed to break into the school. Some of the other emotional consequences is a primary feeling that many of us shut down and don't recognize as we begin to operate in our lives out of fear. Everything that we do, everything that we think is fear-based. It's fear-based because that's all we know. That's what we're coming. We're afraid of success. We're afraid of failure. We're afraid of our relationship. We're afraid of raising kids. We're afraid of everything. And operating out of that causes just more dysfunction, which causes more fear. Look, I screwed up. I can't do this. At whatever it was. Anybody have a problem with authority in here? So the reason I went into business for myself is I went into the military for 4 years. And I couldn't stand being told what to do. Well, why would you go in the military if you don't want to be told what to do? Well, I was raised in the military. That's all I knew. I was terrified about being a civilian. I had no idea. I had no job prospects. So I'll just join the military. And then they'll tell me what to do. And then I'll rebel because I don't want to be told what to do. Set up for failure. Anybody ever try to control other people? God, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I tried to control people, places, and things, and everything that I did. Why? Why would somebody do that? That sounds overwhelming, doesn't it? I'm going to control everybody in my life. Sounds overwhelming, but that's what I was trying to do. Why would somebody do that? Because I didn't have control over what happened to me as a kid, and as a result of not being able to have control, I got what? I got traumatized. I got hurt. And so my idea of not being in control is I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to be traumatized. So if I'm in control of it, nothing's going to happen to me. Have you ever tried to control everything in your life? It's exhausting. And people will not participate. So if I couldn't control it, I would just avoid it. If I was in a relationship and the other person wasn't responding, I can control them, I'm just going to end this relationship. There's no point. If you're not going to do what I say or do what I want, what's the point? I'd have a job. My boss would be telling me what to do when I was younger. And I was like, I don't want to be told what to do. So I just do what I want to do. Then I'd be in trouble and get consequences. And that would make me more angry. So then I'd do more of what they didn't want me to do. It's a cycle that is just futile. I'm going to lose every time. And yet in my head, because of the fear, I'm going to continue to try to dominate and control. And when I can, I'll leave the situation. But I don't give up very easily. My ex, 3 wives would tell you, he doesn't give up very easily. He is going to try to control the situation all the time. People that are real controlling are afraid. They're living in fear, and most of them don't even know it. They don't even know why they're so controlling or they're needing to control. For me, it was because I operated out of fear. And it was a multiple types of fear. Fear about everything in life. Fear that if you know me, you're not going to like me. You guys probably never had that. I lived that way. I lived out of being ashamed of who I am. Because the first 18 years I was told I was worthless and I'd never amount to anything. And that message came verbally and non-verbally all the time. And I was in my 30s before I started the therapy and recognized that I was operating out of fear in everything that I did. The reason I base jumped was I was going to show the world I'm not afraid of anything. Now, keep in mind, base jumping has a 50% fatality rate. It's not an advisable sport for most people. But I knew when I was put on the front page of the Gazette, I was finally successful. I finally showed the world that guy can't be afraid of nothing. Look at him, he's jumping off that bridge. All I wanted to do was to make everybody think I was fearless so that I couldn't get hurt. If you thought I was fearful, then I was susceptible to getting hurt. If you thought I was fearless, you wouldn't even try to hurt me. What a crazy way to live. What are the physical consequences of trying to forget trauma, forget the past, forget an abusive childhood? What are the physical consequences? Anybody? Yes. There's nothing wrong with Jack in the Box. I don't do Jack in the Box frequently. I go to McDonald's and Burger King when I'm not in Jack in the Box. So the physical consequences add up to this. I don't take care of myself. And even when I am, back in my 20s and into my early 30s, I was a gym rat. I was always in the gym working out, always lifting weights, because I wanted the rest of the world not to mess with me. I've always been short. Not always this short, but I've always been short. And there's always these taller guys always just push you around and mess with you. And so I thought if I could just get tough and mean and all of that, that I wouldn't be messed with. Nobody would hurt me. And what I found out is the more tougher I tried to act, the more people wanted to hurt me. You can't be in a bar and act tough and not get in a fight. And if I get in a fight, I'm probably going to lose. I am not a fighter. But I would initiate stuff like I would try to act bad and tough because I was scared. And I have found that most bullies are bullies because they're afraid. They're afraid of being seen as weak or less than. And people used to tell me, you're insane because you base jump. You're insane because you do activities that are insane. I jumped off a 3-story apartment complex one time to jump into their pool. Normal people just don't do that. But I had a bunch of friends there and I was going to show them how I'm fearless. I almost broke both my legs because I was this far from the edge where I landed in the pool. A foot farther back and I probably wouldn't be up here. I'd probably be on two wheels. Just insane kinds of behavior to prove to the world that I'm not afraid. Physical consequences include not taking care of my body by eating poorly. I'm addicted to sugar. Any other sugar addicts here? Thought I was the only one. Any other diabetics that are sugar addicts? Not a good combination, right? I will not go to Costco and buy their awesome cheesecake because every time I've done it, I'm just going to have one piece. And I can't stop. In 2 days, I'll eat the whole cheesecake. This is not good. How many times have I sat down to eat and I'm just going to eat a balanced meal? I'm just going to eat a little bit of this stuff. I had a friend that used to eat just half of everything that was put on his plate. He was a twig. I was like, I can't leave. In my house, I used to blame it on my parents because you couldn't get up until your plate was clean. Anybody have that now? You sit there until you finish that plate, right? And so I would scarf it all down so I could go out of the house and play. And so I learned to eat really. Any fast eaters in here? I was always told when I was younger, you snort your food. Take some time, chew it a little bit. Get the flavor out of it. Don't just inhale it. And I didn't know how to do that. It was gone. I had to get out and do something and show people I wasn't afraid of anything. Go jump off a building. Other physical consequences is that I won't take care of my body by not exercising. Any people, avoid exercise at all costs like me? Yeah. Why do you want to do something that causes your muscles pain, makes you tired? No, I'd rather just inject something. Smoke this makes me happy. Going and working out and getting my body in really good shape takes a lot of work to be happy when I can be happy like this. Eat a whole cheesecake. I'm very happy. I do not take care of myself and my body. Very often that comes from not feeling good about myself. And that comes from a whole history of my childhood of being told that I don't matter, that I'm not good enough, that I'll never amount to anything. And very often the words aren't communicated like that. They're shown in a lot of other ways about, I'll be trying to do something stupid. Get out of the way. Let me finish. Or giving the message to somebody about, when are you ever going to complete this? Get this done. Is there a timeline on that? I'll get to it when I get to it. Absolutely. One of the mental consequences, thank you for bringing it up. One of the mental consequences, anybody ever here have nightmares? How about nightmares that are the same nightmare over and over and over again? That was my experience with the spider. I had those from as far back as I could remember. I would have these dreams that always had this horrible spider in it. That spider was going to get me. And it wasn't until I embraced that spider and found out what that spider was holding, what memory was holding, that I ever got to a point of recognizing that that happened. I couldn't deny it anymore. It was right there. It was as real as we're sitting here. Dreams, according to Carl Jung, dreams tell us a whole lot about what's going on in our life, what our dreams and aspirations are, what our past have been about. There's a tremendous amount. The therapist that I worked with was a Jungian analysis, and he would take dreams and interpret them in a way that was about your life. And everything in the dream is a part of you. According to Carl Jung, everything in your dream is some part of you. And so when you begin to interpret your dreams and look at every part of it, if there's an ocean, that ocean is a part of you. If there's a car, that car is a part of you. Everything in the dream has something to do about you. And when he used to put all of that dream together about everything that was in the dream, I would just sit there in absolute amazement. It was spot on. Incredible work. Some people want to disregard their dreams. And I think dreams, personally for me, dreams are a way to look into our subconscious and see how we're doing, how we're thinking, what's going on with us. But it takes a knowledgeable person to help you interpret that if you don't have that experience. But it's an amazing process. If you ever get an opportunity to work that modality in treatment, to do dream analysis, it's incredible of what you'll find out about yourself. Stress-related illnesses, poor hygiene habits, and even hypochondria often comes from an abusive childhood. It's having pain in my life or creating pain in my life because I think that's what I deserve. Or feeling pain in my body all the time. It might not even be there, but I feel the pain that's as real to me as we are sitting here. And I go to the doctor and he says, your knees are fine. Or your stomach's fine. I don't know why you're feeling this pain. But I will tell you, it's very real. Our minds are incredible about what our minds are trying to tell us. Our minds very often are trying to tell us about things we're not dealing with. Through our dreams, through fantasies and thoughts that come out of nowhere. What was that about? Why am I thinking like that? About experiences that we're performing in our life sometimes have a lot more to do with our past than they do with our present. I have a subconscious mind that works 24/7. It never stops. It's always going. Whether I'm sleeping or not, my subconscious is working. And very often my subconscious is trying to speak to my consciousness. Do you ever have that? Hear those voices? Yeah, I used to think I was delusionary or, I needed medication because I would hear voices. And those voices was me trying to speak to myself. You shouldn't be doing this. I'd hear this voice. You shouldn't be doing this. And I'd do it anyways, I'm a good codependent. I don't follow rules. Why would I follow rules? It's no fun. Breaking the rules, now that's fun. All right? I remember in school, I didn't need to cheat. I was actually a pretty decent academic. But I would cheat just because the chance of getting caught. I just look at a paper and I look up the teacher, see if I got caught. Crazy stuff. But it's that living on the edge that gave me a sense of adrenaline. It gave me a sense of emotion, feeling. Because other than that, it was boring. Why would somebody go jump off a perfectly good cliff? Or jump off a perfectly good building? Why would somebody do that? Well, if you've got something to prove, why not? I can remember for 3 weeks after the jump of being so high that I would go out with my friends and I'd tell everybody about it. You should have seen us. What are the spiritual consequences of trying to forget? Trauma, abuse, our past. What are the spiritual consequences? Anybody ever struggle? Yes. If there's overwhelmed on emotion, of emotional overload, it's hard to focus on anything. When you come out of a childhood that's real painful, even though you're not consciously aware of its effects on you. I remember in college, like I said, I'd read something and I couldn't remember what I read. I couldn't remember what I just studied. I couldn't remember, the study stuff that we were given to take home. The next day we had a test. I'd go in there. I couldn't remember anything that I read. I would fight. My mind would just want to shut down everything, because when I would think, my thoughts always went to either doing something crazy to avoid feeling. You guys have probably never tried to avoid feelings, right? Yeah. You're a very feelings-oriented crowd. Yeah. I just remember doing anything and everything to avoid feeling of any type. The only feeling I wanted to feel is absolute joy. And I would do anything to experience that absolute joy. Any joy seekers here? Yeah. I would do anything to experience that. Drugs, excessive alcohol, base jumping, driving really fast, and, where there's cliffs and you can go off, getting a motorcycle and becoming crazy on a motorcycle. I mean, that's just foolish. But I would do these things because it gave me life. It made me feel. Spiritual consequences. I had a real hard time believing that there was a higher power that you guys talked about. It's all loving and caring and wonderful. And if you believe in this higher power, it's the best thing that you can do. It's the way to heaven. And it's the only way to heaven. And if you don't believe in this higher power, you're not going. And so I just gave up on going. I'm just going to live a life and do what I want, because I'm not going to be able to go anyways. If you knew how I think, well, I was told that he already knows what I think. And basically, because I know what I think, I don't get to go on that path. I have to stay in the back of the bus. I know that believing in a higher power, in every program that I participated, in every church that I've gone to, and most of my friends believe that there is a power greater than ourselves. For me, I refuse to go there. And the reason I refuse to go there is the first higher powers I had in my life were extremely abusive. And so why do you want me to believe in something that I can't see, feel, touch, or smell? Why do you expect me to believe that he's gonna love me and care about me? Well, where was he when I was 5 years old? Where was he when I was 10 years old? And I was getting beaten on a regular basis by a huge 6'4" Vietnam vet who was insane. Why am I going to trust in a higher power when the first higher powers in my life were abusive? And so for many years, I blamed this higher power for not rescuing me and my brothers from what we experienced. And so I resented when I first got sober, when you were telling me about this all-loving, caring higher power. And the higher power can be anything you want it to be. Great, because what I want it to be is non-existent. I don't want to trust in something like that. I will trust what I can see, feel, touch, and smell. And that way I feel protected, because fear was dominating every decision and everything in my life. I operated out of a fear place. And that fearful place caused me to not trust in this higher power concept. It wasn't until I had my first son, and I shared the experience with you, what happened with me at 30 days old, that I dropped on my knees and said a prayer. The first adult prayer that I'd ever made. First sincere prayer. I had prayed many times when I got drunk and got in trouble and I was going to the police station. Okay, look, I heard you're up there. I really appreciate you jump in right now soon. And I don't want to go to jail. I had a lot. Anybody have those kind of prayers? God, I'm glad I'm not alone. So That was my only prayer until that sincere prayer when I'm on my knees and I really know that I need help. I have no idea how to be a father. I never had that modeled for me. I never had anybody that I knew of their families where that was modeled for me. It was just, I was terrified of turning my life over to something else. I'm going to run the show. And what a pathetic show that was. Anybody ever try to run their own life without any help whatsoever? Anybody ever real successful at that? Yeah, I'm still wanting to meet that person. Most every successful person I've ever met, and I've been able to meet a few, believe in some higher power. And I was always amazed at how these people would talk about it. Was their relationship with their higher power is why they're successful in what they do. I was like, no, you're successful because you worked hard. No. But I believed that for a long time. I was not going to turn my life and will over to nothing that I couldn't see. A spiritual consequence of abuse is complete loss of self. Has anybody ever experienced that? Loss of yourself? Yeah. Anybody else ever been a member of the system? Well, just joined the military. I remember my first year in the service trying to be heard. My drill sergeant was the first one to teach me that I wasn't going to be heard. I was complaining about my shin splints that were happening as a result of running in my boots every day, and I got these horrible shin splints. And I went to him to let him know I've got these terrible shin splints. It almost hurts to walk. And he looked at me and said, "Get your ass in the bunk." I was like, that's not very compassionate. I just wanted to be heard. Not a good place to look to be heard. Anybody ever experienced the inability to love yourself? How painful is that? But I didn't love myself, but I expected you to. Oh, you damn well better love me. Whether you were my employer, whether you were my spouse, whether you were my kids, you better love me or you're going to get the wrath of God. I expected everybody else to give me what I could not give to myself. I went to a psychic once so I could see if somebody could really read my mind. That was a waste of money. My spouse used to say all the time, "What do you want me to read your mind?" Anybody ever been told that? You ever heard that? My answer was always, well, yes. I expect that you'll know what I'm wanting. And at the same term, they would expect me to read their mind. Do you ever have a spouse like that, or do you have a spouse like that? Why do I have to tell you to do this? I can just hear my wife's voice ringing in my ear. I shouldn't have to tell you to do this. Anybody ever married a mother or married a father? Some secrecy, but if you would have told me that I was going to marry my mother or my stepfather or my father, I would have said, "Are you absolutely out of your mind?" There is nothing about me that is driven to have those kind of people in my life ever again. Guess what I did? I married my mom 3 times. I'm hoping the 4th time I got it figured out. I am only going to repeat what I know. It doesn't matter if I want. It's like saying to somebody who's addicted, "You're not going to be able to stop." "Oh, yes, I will." You ever know anybody like that? You drink too much. No, I don't. You're going to kill yourself with that. No, I'm not. That kind of denial gets people in a lot of trouble. I know it has me. I want to take another break. I want you, yeah. That's what we lunch break. I want to take a lunch break, but I want you to think about something while you're out. What in your life, in past or current, what in your life in past or current today has not been forgiven, or that you need to forgive, or that you want to forgive? And I want you to consider, it can be people of the past, it can be people within your family, and it can be yourself. But I want you to think about those specific instances. Maybe you've already forgiven them, or maybe you're trying to forgive them, or maybe you said, hell no, I'm not going to forgive them. You know, that was me for a long time, especially with family of origin. They don't deserve to be forgiven. That was my attitude. You know, and then I met a therapist one time who said, you can't forgive somebody unless they ask for your forgiveness. See, I like that. I can use that to my advantage. If you don't ask for my forgiveness, well, you don't expect it. So I want you to think about those things in your life. And you may want to write them down unless you can't. I mean, if you can't remember them, then you're doing better than I can. I don't trust my mind that much to remember. But think about those things while you're on your lunch break. And then we're going to talk about that and see if the forgiveness process and getting into that and doing some writing is going to help you overcome that. Okay? We talked this morning mostly about becoming abused and what happens to us and what our mind tries to do. The first thing our mind tries to do under any type of abuse or trauma, whether it be physical, emotional, mental, doesn't matter. First thing our mind wants to do is what? Protect us by what? Forgetting it, denying that it happened, blacking it out, right? And that works at the time. Right when that happens, it protects us from overwhelm. In most cases, our mind will shut it down so that we can get through it. The problem is, if we allow it to stay shut down, if we allow it to stay locked inside, does it and can it have any impact on us moving forward in our lives? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it can shut us down to a point that we can't even live life. We go into what's called survival mode. And all we're doing is surviving life. Anybody ever done that? Just survived, just continued on with life, and very little emotion, very little enjoyment, very little laughter. It's just doing life like a job, right? I remember looking at other people and laughing and giggling and having fun, especially around the holidays. The holidays were a real tough time for me because in my house, the holidays meant more trauma. It meant more abuse. Because there was expectations that children have because of what the holidays bring about for them. And then in my family, they didn't care too much about pleasuring the kids. It was just taking care of themselves. And so the holidays became like a traumatic event. So as an adult, anytime the holidays were coming, I never looked forward to it. Anybody relate to that? I did not want the holidays to even come. It was just, why do I got to go through this again? It wasn't until I had children and my children taught me how to enjoy the holidays again. I would watch them and they naturally and easily would begin to frolic and play and have expectations about the holidays. You know, whether it was learned from their friends or whether it was learned from what they see on TV, I don't know, because they didn't learn it from me. I was dreading it. And so as my kids began to grow older, just looking forward to being with them and looking forward to celebrating the holidays with them got me out of self enough to where I began to enjoy the holidays. But it took some time and it took some healing. We talked about all the consequences that occur from not dealing with abuse: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual consequences. We lose ourselves. If we don't deal with the abuse or the trauma that occurs, we begin to lose ourselves. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but we begin to lose touch with ourselves and what our needs are. And we began focusing on things outside of ourselves to meet those needs, like addictions, people, places, and things. Those addictions allow me to get out of myself, get into something else, and temporarily it gives me a sense of peace and happiness and joy. But generally that's short-lived, right? It doesn't last very long, because with alcohol and drugs, if that's what I'm escaping into, all of a sudden I start having consequences. And those consequences add to the pain and the suffering that's already there. It adds to the belief that I'm a lousy person. I already believed that in the first place, but now I'm acting it out. And so now it's telling me clearly that I am the problem. Spiritually, it is very difficult for me to connect with a higher power because my previous higher powers were abusive. And I could see, feel, and touch them. They were right there. And now you want me to believe in something I can't see, feel, or touch? No, I don't believe in that. And if there was such a loving God, where was he when I was going through all of this abuse? And so I had a resentment to God for many, many years. You would even talk about God or talk about spirituality, I'd shut you down in a heartbeat. I wouldn't want to hear it. So I have a choice. I can continue to try to forget it and suffer the consequences as a result of trying to forget past pain, past trauma, or trauma that I'm currently experiencing. I can just try to shut it down and forget it and deny it like it's never happening and it's not happening, and try to live life that way in denial. What my personal experience was, and what I've seen from countless amounts of people that I've worked with and that I've met in recovery programs, is that the more that I try to just forget it, the more I begin acting out. And that acting out can come out in relationships. It can come out on my job. It can come out in shutting down any kind of recreation or fun in my life. And life just becomes a chore. It becomes just work, just surviving. And I lived like that for a long time. And I lived like that for such a long time that I thought that was normal. Going out and enjoying life and having fun and playing with my kids, I had lost my ability, my willingness and capability of doing that. I was just there to work and pay the bills and go to bed and repeat. You know, as far as recreation, which if you take the word apart is recreate. Without recreation, without some play in my life, I will become miserable. My body, my life requires work, rest, and play. And if I eliminate one of those things, my life becomes out of balance real quick. If I'm not working, not paying the bills, my life's going to be out of balance. If I'm not resting and taking care of my body, my life's going to become out of balance. If I'm not spending some time having fun and playing and enjoying life, my life's going to become out of balance. I become too serious. Anybody ever been told, no, you're too serious? I heard that so many times, I was just sick of it. I'm serious because life is serious and you better be serious about it. You know, having fun was not an option. That was stuff you do as a child. You don't have fun in life. Now you just work. Now you got to make a living. And there's no time for play. So I get to a point in my life, maybe some of you have been here also, where I can't continue to live in the trauma. I can't continue to live in the abuse, because all I'm doing is I'm acting that out of my life and creating more trauma and creating more abuse onto other people, especially those that are closest to me. Those are the people that get hurt the worst. The ones that are closest to me are the easiest to hurt. And why they love me, I don't know. I don't even love myself. So why are you trying to love me anyways? So I began to push those people away. And I began to hear that term again. You're just so distant. You're not emotionally available. And they're right. They're right. I don't want to be emotionally available, because when I was, I got hurt. And so I want to begin to blame rather than hold people accountable. I stay in the blame game. I am this way because of the stupid childhood I am. I am this way because my spouse is this and that and the other. I am this way because my kids don't listen to me. I am this way because, there's no such thing as God. Whatever it is that I can blame it on, I've done all of that. Rather than myself become accountable and hold those in my life that had an impact on my life accountable. And by holding somebody accountable, it doesn't necessarily mean that I go find them and go up to them and confront them. You can hold somebody accountable without them ever knowing it if you want to do the work. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. Part of forgiveness and forgiving myself and forgiving others, I have to walk through the phase of accountability and being able to put the shame that was thrown on me back to where it needs to go. As an abuse survivor, as a trauma survivor, I carry the shame of the perpetrator. It's not even my shame, but I'm living out that shame. I'm acting as a damaged person, an abused person, and I can't be healthy because I'm carrying around somebody else's shame. So part of my recovery was giving the shame back, giving the responsibility of what was done to me back to those that were responsible, and stop carrying it around. And what happens with a lot of perpetrators and a lot of victimizers is they victimize and perpetrate their children, somebody at work, some lesser person, more vulnerable person, and then that person begins to victimize others. I treat my employee really bad. What do? They go home and treat their family really bad. Then their family grows up and they go home and they treat their families bad, and they treat their bosses bad, and they treat their employees. And it just continuously goes on until somebody says it stops with me. And I remember getting to that point in my recovery. I remember saying on my knees, after I had just abused my son at 30 days old, I need help. I don't know how to do this. I admitted my powerlessness. I admitted my hopelessness, my helplessness on my knees to a higher power that I didn't necessarily believe in. But it was my first time ever asking for help. From there, I incorporated into my life a therapist, a very wise man who helped me go through a lot of that inner child stuff. I incorporated codependency into my life. I was working with a bunch of other therapists at treatment centers. They all had similar stories, similar histories. And we just started meeting at a Catholic church in Phoenix and talking about how we were screwed up, how we were acting out that, and where it came from. And that grew and grew and grew to where in the first month, we went to over 100 people in that meeting in just 1 month. So people wanted answers, and I continue to want answers. I am continually looking to see if I am being a spiritual giant or a spiritual child looking for growth opportunity. I've spent many times acting like a spiritual giant, and people just sort of move away from you when you act like that. The know-it-all, the guy that's perfect, person that does nothing wrong. You know, I have no goal in my life anymore of being that person. It's a heavy responsibility to carry because all of a sudden everybody begins to look to you of when is he going to make a mistake? When is he going to screw up? When is he going to be human? And so I try to stay out of that role. I try to stay in the role of I'm learning just like everybody else. I am a work in progress, and I hope to remain that way. When I'm not that work in progress, then I'm trying to control other people and make them do their work and make them have progress so that they quit messing with me and irritating me. No, the irritation's about me. It's about my perception of things, my perception of people. When I change my perception and me, all of a sudden people are nicer. People are friendlier. I like more people. It becomes easier to like you and like myself. And until I can accomplish that, which is what we're going to talk about now, about learning to love myself, until I can accomplish that, I need to get rid of the expectation that I'm going to be able to love anybody else very well. I can fake it. I learned how to fake it. I can draw you in like a black widow does into their nest, into their web, and then you get stung because I'm not available. I'm emotionally distant. In order for me to stay grounded, I got to continue to do the work. We are always a work in progress. I don't think we ever get finished. And if you've already hit that finish line, see me after this because I'd really like to know what that line is. Is it possible to forgive those that have done us harm? Is it possible? Is it possible to forgive those that really, truly traumatized us and abused us? What do you think? It is possible? Not easy. Anybody taking that journey or on that journey? Care to share? Thank you. Have you guys ever heard of growing pains? Right? When you decide to take a journey and go through the trauma and heal that trauma of your past or the abuse of your past, that journey requires you to go through some pain and suffering. That journey requires you to go through sadness and grief. It is normal. Understand this. It is normal that when we're experiencing as a child to figure out a way to shut it out or shut it down, because it's too overwhelming for a child to experience that. They don't have the capability or the coping mechanisms necessary, so they learn how to black it out. They learn how to disassociate. They learn how to become so active in an addictive manner that they don't have to think about it. For me, it was never being at home. Every single night throughout my teenage years, I snuck out my bedroom window. Every single night. And I would get home right before they were waking up to go to work. And as soon as they went to work, I'd start acting out again, whether I was at school acting out and being the class clown, or whether it was going and participating in activity that was unhealthy, drugs, alcohol, and so forth. I was going to escape it somehow. I was determined. The problem is I can escape it for only so long. And then in my adulthood, it won't allow me to live. Either I'm going to go through it or I'm going to be stifled by it. I'm going to be overwhelmed by it. I've talked to so many people over the years as a therapist who said, I don't want to deal with the past. I don't want to go back through that. I don't need to remember all that crap. Or my past didn't affect anything. I had a perfect childhood. It was awesome. I was like, tell me what was awesome about it. And I get people to start talking about their childhood. And I said, well, that doesn't really sound too awesome. The fact that, you were beaten with a strap while you were naked for days on end, that's not normal. It wasn't my house. That's how we all were raised. That's how my parents were raised. How many times have I heard that throughout my life? That's how my parents were raised. Or my parents used to say, this is nothing compared to what I used to get. We used to have to walk 10 miles in the snow up a hill in the blizzard. It was tough for us. You have it easy. And the reality is, a kid's experience is a kid's experience. It doesn't matter what the parents' experiences were. It doesn't matter what the uncle's experiences were or anybody else's. The kid only has one experience, and that's their own. And they draw from that. So if there's any amount of pain and suffering, that traumatizes or abuses that child emotionally. And if they don't have anybody to help them get through that, it just gets stored. It just gets tucked away. It gets overlooked and denied. And all of a sudden, I'm a grown-up, and I'm trying to have a healthy marriage, and it just keeps falling apart. Time after time after time. And I don't know what's causing it. I can't see it. I know if my spouse would just change the ways they treat me, we'd get along a lot better. If they'd stop acting out or doing this, we would be so much happier. And the reality is, I chose that person for a reason. That person is in my life for a specific reason. And I begin to look, rather than try to flight from that and leave that, I begin to look at what is it that causes me to be attracted to this situation with this person? What is it about me? As long as I'm focused on what it is about somebody else, I am never going to heal. I will repeat that pattern over and over again. I can get rid of this person, but I'll guarantee you I'll go out and find another person and do the same exact thing. That's why I say I was married 3 times. However, the amount of relationships that I've been in my life is endless, and every single one of them were the same. The 90-day wonder relationships. I was good for 90 days. That was it. And then I began to detach and deteriorate. And I really didn't know why. When I was younger, I blamed it on them. Whoever it was, whoever them was, I blamed it on them. As I got older, I began to realize I'm part of this problem, but I don't know how I'm part of this problem. And then I met Ken and Mary. Ken began to point out to me what my problem was. That's how he became a dear friend, as well as his wife. And then Curly, I don't know if you've read the book on CoDA, but Curly and Barbara, and then Curly became my first sponsor. And Curly wasn't as kind in his feedback as Ken was. He was a little bit more direct with me, which is what I needed. Being of military background and being in the military, if you would just pat me on the back and say, maybe we should look at this different, I didn't even want to talk to you. Get away from me. But if you said, you know what, you're part of the problem, it's time we stop, sit down, take a look at this, and get down to the bottom of why you're creating this in your life. Okay. Then I was like ready to go. I was ready to be heard. Everybody listens differently. Everybody needs a different approach. My approach, having grown up in the family that I did and being military minded, I had to have a drill sergeant. I had to have somebody tell me this is the way it's going to be. You're going to start doing this differently. If you want to feel differently, you got to do things different. If you want change in your life, you got to change things in your life. And so I started getting these messages and realizing that, okay, maybe I am part of the problem. Just a little bit. Started out, well, okay, I'll own this much. Next thing I know, several years later, it's like, gosh, I am the problem. As far as it pertains to my own life, I am the problem. I'm creating this in some way, and it becomes my responsibility to find out how and why I'm creating that. That's when recovery begins to actually take place. Thank God for 12-step recovery programs, because you can get around a lot of other people that are just as sick and twisted as you, and that are trying to become better, healthier people. And that has been the biggest glory of my entire life, is that recovering people have continued to do this to me. Open their arms and hug me. No matter if I was the jerk, or no matter if I was the pastor of the meeting, no matter if I was the preacher, no, it didn't matter. People continued to open their arms and hug me, which is what family should do. That's what I missed in my family, was the compassion, the sympathy, the understanding, the direction, the kindness. Not in my family. You're talking about completely somebody else. You're talking about Bart Simpson's family, maybe, not mine. So is it possible to forgive those? There's numerous different ways to do this. I'm going to share some ways that I've personally done that have been real helpful for me. And then we'll talk about what research shows that works. First of all, how many people in here have ever written a letter to themselves? Did it help? How many people have here ever written a letter to that inner child? Did that help? When I started sharing this stuff with my adult son, my oldest son, who is the brainiac, scientifically oriented kind of guy, he was like, "You wrote a letter to who? Yourself? Why?" And I told him this exact thing. The person that needs to count the most in my life is me. And I grew up thinking that I should count last. Everybody else should be first. I should be last. And if you're living life out of that mentality, it is very difficult to grow and to have successful relationships, because you're always working for everybody else. You're not working for yourself. Once I began to recognize that and confront that, I had to get to a place that I started to forgive not everybody else. That was easier for me, but I had to get to a place of where I identified about me that what needed to be forgiven. Forgiving myself has been a lifelong challenge for me, because my first reaction is to go back to what I was told as a child. Even as a 62-year-old man, I have a tendency, the first reaction is to go back to the thoughts I was a child. When something doesn't go right, you're such an idiot. Anybody ever done that? God, I'm so stupid. And I didn't realize how unhealthy that is. I just played it off as like, well, everybody says that. Everybody does that, right? For me, it reinforced what I already felt about myself, that I am stupid, that I am an idiot, that my mom was right. I never will amount to anything, that I'm going to be just like my drunken father. All of those tapes start going off. Because why? Because I got a flat and I couldn't change it because I didn't have the crowbar, and I was supposed to put it in the car and I didn't. I forgot. And so I'm sitting on the side of the road. It's 120 degrees out, and I'm so stupid. If I would have just put this in the car, you know. Anybody in here attack themselves? Just berate yourself? I did it so bad that if anybody else even did it half as bad as I did to myself, they were fired. They're no longer in my life. Get out of here. And I'd give them some choice words as they were leaving. You know, I've never allowed anybody to treat me as bad as I can treat myself. So it gets to the point of, at some point in my recovery, I've got to get to a point where I'm willing to forgive myself for all of my indiscretions, for all of my imperfectness, for everything about me that I've criticized myself for years about. I have to get to a point of forgiving myself. If I can't forgive myself, how can I possibly move on and feel good about me? And if I don't move on and feel good about me, how am I going to treat you? How am I going to treat the people in my life? If I can't stand myself, or if I'm miserable with who I am, how am I possibly going to treat you any better? Now, I can on the surface. I got a new job and I can treat people at the new work environment just wonderful. Give it time and I'll be ignoring all those people and doing whatever the hell I want. Same way in relationships. The first 90 days are awesome. I will shower you with gifts and flowers and trips and you name it, you get it all. Then after that 90 days, I start to say, why do you want to go there? Why do you want to do that? I began to detach. I began to pull away. And it has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with me. I don't feel good enough about myself to have this relationship. I don't feel good enough about myself to work on myself as a parent, to develop myself as a better human being. What's the point? I'm worthless. So I stay stuck in that self-pity and that misery. Once I get to a point where I'm willing to do the work, it requires for me forgiving myself or forgiving anybody else. It requires for me to go through a process. Forgiveness is just not something that is, oh, I forgive you. It's no problem. Depending on the harm, depending on the abuse, forgiveness comes across as something that's very intense and overwhelming to follow through with, to a point where it is just a matter of meeting the person, giving them a hug and saying, you know, would you forgive me? Or forgiving somebody else. I forgive you. But there's a process that has to occur. And that process can be done in a number of different ways. Some people like to journal. Some people like to write letters. There's actually research that shows that writing out something is much better and more effective than using the computer and keyboard. There is something that occurs that brings out the emotions of abuse and trauma when you actually put pen to paper or pencil to paper. That is why healthy people very often are people that journal on a regular basis. You talk to a lot of very successful people. They're successful in life as parents, as family, as friends. Many of them are people that journal. And by journaling, it keeps track of their emotions, it keeps track of their state of mind and their mental health. I used to journal all the time when I was married. And maybe some of you had this experience. My significant other, one time after an argument, when I stormed out of the house, decided to go read my journal. Well, that was a mistake. Because I was more honest in my journal than I was with her. I hate this bitch. Right? And she would read it. She goes, oh, so I'm a bitch? Huh? You think I'm a bitch? And it was like, look, that's personal. That's my journal. I don't care. Anybody ever had somebody read their journal? God, that's awful. You know, that's very private and it's something that is very healthy, but you've got to have a safe environment and you got to have people in your life that you trust, because you need to be able, when you're right, to be 100% honest. 100%. If I can't be 100% honest with myself and put it in print, then how am I going to possibly be 100% honest with you? I won't be. I won't. When I write it down, I can also see over time how I'm doing, as far as if I'm growing, if I'm not, if I'm stagnant, if I'm regressing. It's real easy to see in your writing how you're doing, how you're really doing. if I trust my mind to remember how I'm doing, how many people are really aware of last month how you were doing on any given day? If I had a journal, I could go to that journal and look it up and say, I wasn't doing near as bad as I thought I was. Because sometimes that's what my mind does. When I think back about how things were, I don't think very positive. I look back, it's like, God, I was a jerk then, and I was an ass then, rather than see any good things that happen. In journaling, it's real important that you put everything down, not just journal about the terrible stuff or the negative stuff that happened that day. Put everything down. Where you stopped and helped somebody change their tire. Not telling you so much, but when it's easy, it's much easier to go back and reflect when you've got a journal than it is to try to remember and recall how things were a month ago, a year ago, or whatever. So journaling is a real healthy thing to do. Writing letters to yourself is also really healthy. And some people think it's really weird. I wouldn't go around advertising that, because when you tell people I'm going to write a letter to myself, they give you this strange look. So it's important that, I think it's important that we put down in print how we're doing, and we do it on a regular basis. I want to talk about a process of forgiveness that is a method that was developed by a psychologist, and I wrote down his name before when I put this together, but somehow I didn't put it on here. But he's a psychologist that did a lot of work, grief work with people. And that was his primary focus, his primary work. And so one time he was sitting down and he wrote out this process that I'd like to review with you, that I find extremely helpful in focusing on forgiveness, especially of myself, because I don't know how you are, but I'm one of the hardest people to forgive. I'm one of my worst critics of myself. I beat myself up more than anybody ever does, and that is my standard operating procedure. That's what's ingrained into me. That's what feels normal to me. To go back and say, it wasn't that bad. You were a pretty nice guy. Feels uncomfortable, feels awkward. And that should feel more normal than saying, you really were an ass. You're a jerk. That's comfortable to me. It's like, yeah, you are. It's ingrained in me to do negative self-talk rather than positive self-talk. Positive self-talk, I'll tell you a quick story. My sponsor in CoDA, a guy named Curly Monroe, told me to put on the mirror every day, say, I love you 10 times. Some of you may have heard this story I read. And he'd say, just stand in front of the mirror and say, I love you 10 times. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I am not going to do that. He goes, well, find a different sponsor that will co-sign your bullshit. That was the way he talked to me. And he goes, obviously, you're not willing to go to any lengths. You're not willing to grow. So find somebody else you're willing to work with, because if you're going to work with me, you're going to have to grow. So I thought about it for a couple seconds and said, okay, Scarlett, I'll try it. So I went home and decided that I wouldn't do it, but that if he asked me, I'd tell him I was. 2 or 3 weeks later, Curly says, so I guess you need a different sponsor. I said, why is that? He goes, because you're not doing the assignments I'm giving you. So what's the point? Why should I be your sponsor? I was like, what do you mean I'm not doing it? He goes, I told you to tell yourself you love yourself in the mirror every day every day before you start the day. Just say, I love you 10 times each day. And you refuse to do it. I was like, how the hell does he know that? So I thought maybe he called my wife. My wife narked on me or something. I don't know. Nope. He says, I can tell you're not doing it. I said, oh, come on. So I decided that I'm going to do it this time, but I'm not going to tell him. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it every day. I'm going to see what he says, in a couple of 3 weeks from now. So every day I'm looking in the mirror. I love you, 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 I love you. Hard to look in the mirror, right in my face and say, I love you, I love you. No. It felt really uncomfortable, really awkward. So I was like, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I get 10 times and I was done. I couldn't wait. I'd brush my teeth and go to work. So I did it every day for a few weeks. And it got easier. I was finally able to look myself after a few weeks. Just say, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. 10 times. I still felt like it was awkward and foolish, but I'm willing to do the assignment. Curly seemed to be a lot healthier and he was a lot happier in his marriage than I was in mine. So I'm going to follow his direction. So a few weeks later, Curly says, it's working. What's working? He goes, you're starting to like yourself a little more, aren't you? I was like, come on. I said, are you talking to my wife? No, I can see it in you. It's really starting to take hold on you. You're starting to believe in yourself. And the fact that it was getting easier in the mirror should have said something to me. The fact that I was able to look at myself the entire time that I said it, rather than dashing my eyes off to other directions, should have told me something. But he was able to see that something was different. I was a little bit more joyful. I was a little bit more happy. I was a little less serious. He asked me to continue on with that for a long time, for months and months. And so I did. Even though my wife would make fun of me, we'd get together at parties and she'd tell other people, yeah, he's got to stand in front of the mirror and tell him he loves himself so much. You know, and to the average layperson that doesn't know what the hell I'm doing or why I'm doing it, that would sound pretty goofy. Your husband stands in front of a mirror and tells him he loves himself. I continued to do it. I followed directions, which I don't do easily. I followed the directions, and it really began to make a difference. And then all of a sudden, after a few months of doing that, Curly says, okay, now that you've been doing it for a while, at the end of saying I love you 10 times, I want you to give yourself a kiss right in the mirror. Oh, no. Nope. No, that's where I got to draw the line. He goes, okay. When you get another sponsor, let me know. And I was like, come on, really? I mean, giving myself a kiss in the mirror, I mean, really? What is that going to do for me? He goes, doesn't matter what you think or what you think you know. I'm asking you to do this as your sponsor. I want you to do it. I reluctantly agreed. I made sure nobody was around me because I was not going to have my wife catching me kissing myself in the mirror. I mean, think about it. What would your spouse say if you walked in or she walked in and you were kissing yourself in the mirror? So this whole visualization is going through my head of getting caught doing that. So I make sure nobody's in the bedroom, nobody's in the bathroom. I do it real quick. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. However, did you know that you cannot, absolutely cannot kiss yourself on the cheek in the mirror? You can't do it. Everybody who I've ever truly loved, like my children, my wife, whatever, I had no problem kissing them on the lips, none whatsoever. I loved them. I knew that I loved them. The only people I would ever just give a peck on the cheek is, you know, an aunt, an uncle, something like that. You know, I love them, but just on the cheek. The first time I tried this, I literally went to kiss myself on the cheek just for a second and realized I can't. And so when I told him that, he laughed hysterically for a few hours. He just busted out laughing. He goes, you seriously tried to kiss yourself on the cheek? I said, well, maybe I shouldn't have told him that because I'm never going to hear the end of it now. But it showed me something. It showed me very clearly of how much I didn't love myself. First of all, that I wasn't even willing to do the exercise, that I was willing to lie about and say that I was doing it, and I didn't want to do it. And then when I was doing it, I was making sure nobody else was around and could hear me. I did it in secret, and doing recovery in secret isn't really effective. And I didn't want anybody to know that I'm learning to love myself. I didn't want anybody to know that I despised and hated myself, that I was ashamed of who I am. To the rest of the world, I put on an image of confidence. I own my own company. I'm successful. I'm this, I'm that. I live in a beautiful house. My wife gets to drive. We live in North Scottsdale, all that stuff. And I was hating who I am. I'm miserable about who I am. It was my job to convince you that I was somebody that I wasn't. You guys have probably never done that. But I've spent a lifetime trying to convince other people of somebody that I wasn't. I didn't want to tell them I'm ashamed of myself. I'm a 10-year-old kid who was abused and I don't know how to live life. I'm not going to go and tell you that. At least until I came to CoDA. Then I tell everybody that. Because everybody else is telling me the same thing. Practicing forgiveness is imperative. And it's not something that comes naturally by me, especially forgiving myself. So I had to learn a process to do that. And there's a process that the psychologist actually wrote out and figured out that we go through in an actual forgiveness process. I want to review that with you. It's called the REACH method. And the REACH method is something that if you were practice, you will actually get a complete forgiveness, either of yourself or somebody else. But each step has to be taken. You can't do 3 out of the 5. You can't do 1 out of the 5. You've got to do all of them in order for that forgiveness process to take place. And forgiveness is a process. Some people want you to be able just to forgive yourself like this. My oldest son is that scientific guy, and he thinks, what do you mean process? You either forgive him or you don't. It's just done like that. That's not how forgiveness works. That's not how love works. How long does it take to learn to love somebody? It takes a while. When you agree, you don't just get somebody in your life and immediately you're madly in love with them, unless you were an addict like me and you were addicted to relationships. You wanted to convince them immediately that they were the whole world. And then 90 days later, you tell them they're not the world, I'm the world. Trying to convince somebody is something that codependents do all the time. I know for me that forgiveness is about a process that is not easy, especially when I've genuinely hurt somebody else or myself that I love very much. Admitting my faults took me a long time in recovery, because admitting my faults brought up that shame. It brought up in that, what my mom used to say is, you'll never amount to anything. You're going to be just like your father. So every mistake that I did, I would hear my mom's voice. Oh, she was right. She was right. And so that whole shame-based behavior would come out in me, and it would just shut me down. And then I wouldn't want to continue on in that relationship. So rather than to try to continue on a relationship, I'll just change the relationship. I'll just get somebody different. And my work environment, when I used to work for other people, if I was in a situation where that person was no longer liking me or we got an argument, first thing I'd want to do is leave. Get out of the situation. Don't deal with this person anymore, because now they know what I already know, and that I'm worthless. I'm ashamed of me. And operating out of that shame place is something that causes, continued failure in my life. I can't succeed. So this REACH method is, once I recognize the damage that I've done, I've got to get to a point of going through a forgiveness process. And this REACH method is that. The first step of this is called recall. And by recall, AA is well known for, if you don't deal with your resentments, there's a good chance that you'll drink again. In other recovery programs, it's the same process. In dealing with the step work, we have to get to a point of being willing to forgive those that we resent. If we carry those resentments, our behavior doesn't change. That was real painful for me when they said, you've got to forgive the people that harmed you. You've got to be able to be willing to forgive those that abused you if you want to grow. And I was like, no way. No way. They don't deserve my forgiveness. Never going to happen. The problem is when I choose that mentality, who stays sick? Them or me? If I'm in a process of getting well and I want to heal, I've got to be able to heal the wound that is causing me to have a dysfunctional life. And part of healing that wound is recalling who harmed me, what they did, and getting to a point of genuinely forgiving them. Does that necessarily mean you've got to do it in person? Nope. Especially if it's not safe to do it in person. It does require me to list every single time and every single thing that somebody hurt me that I haven't let go of. And I recommend going through this process because by the end of completing the process, you've let it go. It's no longer going to control your life or affect your life. It's real important to remember the emotion. When I begin to recall this, and again, I always suggest writing it out. When I begin to do that, typically what happens is the emotions come back. Sometimes not quite as strong as they were at the time that the occurrence happened, but they come back. Whenever I would think about talking about my childhood 30 years ago, 35 years ago, what would come up in me is rage and anger. And the rage and the anger covered all of the sadness and the pain and the hurt. I didn't want to deal with the sadness, pain, and hurt. I didn't want to give another tear to the family that I came from and the abuse that I received. I didn't want to give them any type of opportunity to have me cry about what was done again, especially as a grown man. You know, we have a cultural thing that says, men don't cry. You know, I wrote a story one time. Ken asked me to write my story. I didn't know he was going to put it in the book, but I wrote my story and it was about men don't cry. Because I really believe that. If you're a real man, like a military, you just don't cry. Never. Don't ever let anybody see, because if you do, you're weak. And that kept me real sick. It kept me from healing. What does a child do when they're hurt? They cry. Why? Because I'm hurt. Why can't I permit myself, when the hurt is obvious, the wounds are obvious? My entire adult life, I'm struggling at living life and finding happiness and joy in life. That's pretty a serious wound. Why is it not okay for me to just let it go and let the pain out and cry? I never, ever was allowed to give myself permission for that before I got into this program. And I will tell you, once it started, I didn't think it ever stopped. It just kept coming and coming. More memories became clear, more situations that occurred as my childhood became clear, and I just began to cry. However, anybody ever have a good cry? How you feel afterwards? How the lights are brighter, the sky is brighter and bluer, everything's alive. I mean, when you have a really good cry, you just let it go. And there's just sense of peace. There's sense of satisfaction that comes with that. And I wanted to resist that because I thought it was a sign of weakness. I had been taught that. The second step to this reach method is empathize. This is very, very hard for some people, and it was for me. Okay, so we got about a half hour. She's going to try to get this on the YouTube channel. Anybody who needs to leave or has to leave, please feel free to do that. If you've got other obligations, it's completely understandable. To empathize is to understand what the person went through that caused them to be the person that they are. When you're doing trauma work and abuse work, the last thing most people want to do, and the last thing I wanted to do, is empathize with the abuser. When I did, and I found out what my grandfather did to my mother and his two sons, it was awful. My grandfather was a very powerful man, one of the biggest landowners in Indiana. He was a physician, very, very powerful man. And he took that and he abused his children horribly. And they weren't allowed to speak out about it because of his reputation in town. And so what did they do? They carried it with them into their lives as adults. And who did that get acted out on? Their children. And it just generationally goes on and on and on until somebody says, it stops with me. To empathize is to put yourself in a position of understanding that the person that perpetrated this on you, in my case, it was primarily my family members, uncles, aunts, the whole works. They were all so abused that that's all they knew how to do, is to continue on with that cycle of abuse. And the behavior in and of itself is not what I'm forgiving. The behavior is unforgivable. Abusing somebody, bottom line, care what anybody says, it's unforgivable, the behavior. But the human being committing that, I have to get to a point for my recovery. Well, I don't care what it does for them, but for my recovery, I got to get to a point that I'm willing to empathize and understand that this person, something happened to this person to cause them to act like they have. Very difficult step, but incredibly healing. Now I got to give them a gift. Altruistic gift is a selfless gift. It's putting myself in that person's shoes and beginning to understand that very possibly the reason that they brought me up and treated me the way they did as parents is that's what they experienced. To excuse somebody's behavior is not what I'm suggesting, but to understand them as an abuser who's been abused, as somebody who's passing on what was given to them, is a choice that I need to get to for my own recovery. I don't have to do anything to them or about them. I have to do it for me. I'm the one that has to get past this, because if I don't, I'm going to begin to abuse others myself. My own children, shaking my own child. So the gift is allowing myself to get to a point where I can look at the abuser as a victim also. The next step is commit. I have to make a commitment if I want to recover, if I want to continue to get healthy. When I say recover, I mean get healthy from whatever it is that is in your life and that keeps you stuck. In order to get healthy, I have to commit to this process. I have to commit to being forgiving. And that is not where I was at in my 20s and 30s at all. I couldn't even forgive myself. And I wasn't about to forgive anybody who had harmed me. As a matter of fact, I went into a field of being a counselor to help other people to confront their past so that they can heal from it. So I'm asking them to forgive their perpetrators, but I can't do it myself. And lastly, hold. When I get to a point of forgiving, and you'll know when you're there, it affects your entire body. It affects the way that you think. It brings peace and comfort and contentment to your life when you get to this point of being forgiven. When I'm willing to forgive those that harmed me, gives me peace, gives me happiness. And I was always of the mind of, I'm not going to forgive them. They're unworthy. They're this, they're that. Holding on to that resentment keeps me sick. It doesn't harm them at all. And that's ultimately what I wanted. I wanted to get back at them. So, okay, I'll never talk to you again. How is that going to harm them? It's not that important if they don't ever talk to me again in their life, but it's important for me. I have to get past this. So I've got to hold on to that forgiveness, because I don't know about you, but the abuse that I suffered as a child has continued to come out in my adulthood at different times. Something will trigger a memory, and all of a sudden I'm real sad or I'm real angry because it reminded me of when. So I've got to continue when that happens to hold on to that forgiveness and remember, look, they were sick. They're spiritually not well. The reason that they perpetrate people and perpetrated me was because they're not healthy. If I look at them as bad, evil, all of that, it doesn't do anything other than keep me sick. Very, very difficult to do when you've been horribly traumatized and abused. I agree. No question whatsoever. But if that step's not taken, if I can't get to that point of being forgiving, they will not be affected whatsoever. I will. I will hold on to that resentment. That is why in 12-step programs, they say resentment is the #1 offender. It takes more people out to dysfunctional behavior than anything else in life. And the only thing I know that cures resentment is getting into a forgiving place. Nothing heals resentment better than forgiveness. And I need to be included in that. I need to be included in forgiving myself. Any questions on that at all? So very quickly, there's different ways you can forgive yourself. But one of the positive ways, and I talked about visualization earlier, about doing inner child work, one of the ways that was the most effective to me, that brought out the emotions and made it real for me, was doing visualization of myself as a child. By myself alone, nobody else was around, putting a chair in front of me and actually visualizing my child right in front of me, as I was as a child. And it was real difficult at first because I had a real hard time visualizing myself as a child. It was that painful. And I didn't even realize that that's what was stopping me from being able to visualize myself, was all of the pain and the shame that I had about that child. I had become ashamed of myself as a child because I was taught to be ashamed of myself as a child. And so I had to see myself in that chair, and I had to ask for forgiveness from that child for all of the neglect and all of the abandonment that I was doing to that child, and the way that I mistreated myself throughout the years as adulthood. I had to apologize for that to myself. And it sounds silly. Well, apologize to myself? When you put that child right in front of you and you visualize yourself as a kid and you begin to have a conversation, you will make it very real. And if you allow yourself, I have conversations with that child, and years ago had many conversations, but when I would put that child in a chair in front of you and start talking, I would ask questions. Do you forgive me? Can you forgive me? And that child would look at me with sadness, shake his head. Yes. And I would just, as an adult, I'd just start bawling right there in the chair. I made it real. I made that child real. which is all that child needed, was to be made real and to be made whole and to be forgiven, not forgotten, not abandoned. Because I was doing to that child, myself, the exact same thing that was in that child when he was a child. I was neglecting and abandoning that child within me. And that child lives within all of us. Every single one of us. You don't believe me? Try these exercises. Sit at home, put a chair in front of you, visualize yourself as a kid right in front of you. Visualize what you're wearing, what your facial expressions are, what your hands are doing, what your feet are doing. Make it very real. And then ask a question. Do you forgive me? Do you remember when? And just listen for the answers. I've never known anybody that didn't get the response. Never met one single person that didn't get a response back. That child will speak to you if you make it real. A lot of my decisions in early adulthood came out of that kind of therapy. Is before I would do something, I would check it out with my adult and my child and make sure that that's okay. Like relationships got better for me when I made that relationship real and I started to heal that relationship. I started to be more empathetic and caring and loving for other people and struggles that they were going through because I was giving that finally to myself. As I said earlier, I treated myself worse than I had allowed anybody else to treat me. And it had to stop. I didn't deserve to be treated that way. But I grew up and I was convinced and told time and again that I did deserve to be treated that way. If my own higher powers, my parents would do that, then I must be a piece of crap. Why else would they treat me bad? I'm their son. Why else would they treat me like this? Well, it's because I'm worthless. They're right. I'll never amount to anything. I had to confront those messages. I don't know about you, but if you live with that voice in your head that calls yourself names, change it. Every time that name is called, every time you say, "God, I'm such an idiot," you're incredibly intelligent. Just come back with a phrase like that, and it will do more for your brain than you can imagine. Your brain believes what you tell it. All of the science, all of the latest research on brain study shows that your brain believes exactly what you tell it. So if you tell your brain you're never going to amount to anything, if you tell your brain that you're a piece of crap, if you tell your brain that you're an idiot and that you're stupid, your brain will believe it. I had to change my self-talk. I had to start, those instances wouldn't go away on their own. I had to consciously, when I would do that, when I'd stumble, or when I'd do something to make a mistake, whatever, and I'd go right into that, what an idiot, or you're so stupid. I had to change right then and say, you're so intelligent. You're really bright. And when I started to do that, then I started to change. Things began to be different in how I felt about me. And isn't that the goal? If you come from the family that I came from or similar to it, you know what I'm talking about when it's real hard to love yourself or even like yourself at times, because all you've ever believed and all you've ever been told is that you'll never amount to anything. And this kind of work feels stupid. It feels awkward. It feels unnatural. And the reality is it shouldn't. It shouldn't feel unnatural to love yourself. It shouldn't feel unnatural to tell yourself that you love yourself. But if you're raised in a family where you've always been told and given messages that you're worthless, saying you love yourself is just not going to fit. That's going to feel real uncomfortable. And the more uncomfortable it feels, tells you how terrible you feel about yourself. You should not be ashamed or embarrassed ever to tell yourself how much you love yourself. It is key for me to my recovery to learn to love myself. And by learn, I mean learn. I was taught for 18 years that I was worthless. It's taken me a lifetime of changing those messages and saying, no, you're not worthless. You're not stupid. You're actually quite intelligent. You're very bright. So what that your son doesn't agree with you? They're the first to criticize, aren't they? I want to do one last exercise here with you, if I may. And I'd like to do a little bit of visualization of that child. You do not have to participate in this if you feel uncomfortable, or if you feel not at ease about it. Don't participate. I would ask that you would listen to it, follow along with the process of what it's about, and try it in the comfort of your own home in private. But I will ask if those that are willing to participate, we're going to do a little visualization exercise of yourself, of you as a child. And I'd like to see yourself as a child between 5 and 10 years old. So at this time, what I'd like you to do is get in a relaxed position, let your arms hang down, take a few deep breaths to relax. And then to the best of your ability, I want you to try to recall exactly what you look like at some age between 5 and 10. It'll come to you if you just allow your brain to go back and see yourself at that age. See yourself as that child. And allow that child to be doing whatever they're doing, sitting, standing, playing, whatever. I just want you to see that child. Once you're able to visualize that child, I want you to look at what they're wearing, what shoes they have on or shoes they don't have on, what their facial expression is. Are they talking or quiet? What does their mood seem to be? It's really important to try to see exactly what they're wearing and the expression on their face. Try to visualize exactly what they're wearing and the expression on their face. What they may be doing, if they're active or if they're inactive. Once you have that child in front of you, ask for their attention. Can I talk to you for a second? Just for a minute. I'd like you to ask this child if they'd be willing to work with you on healing your past, on healing some wounds that have occurred. Nobody escapes childhood without some wounds. And in a healthy family, those wounds are usually resolved. But in an unhealthy family, they just pile up. They're just part of life. But they don't get healed. So visualize this child and just simply ask them if they're willing to work with you on healing this. And try to clearly see what they say and how they act. And ask that child if he'd be willing to meet with you on a regular basis over the next month. And for now, just ask for him to be available to you when you meet with him again. Would you be willing to be available to me to meet again? Once you have your answer, if you just say goodbye for now, and as you're ready, just come back to the room. Is there anybody who'd like to share what that experience was like for them? Thank you. Thank you for sharing. In your packet, you have this 12 commandments needed for loving yourself. I'd like you to make a commitment to yourself and to that child within you that over the next month, you're going to review these 12 things. If you can daily, but at least every few days, I want you to review these 12 commandments and try to interact those into your life. Put them to work. Example, stop all criticism of self. So over this next week, I want to pay attention to that. I want to pay attention to how critical I am being of myself. And not only do I want to become aware of it, I want to correct it. It's okay not to be perfect. There is no perfection when it comes to being a human being. Won't happen to any one of us. So we have to get okay with being imperfect. So stop criticizing yourself. You will make mistakes. You have made mistakes, and you'll continue to make mistakes throughout your life. It's part of being a human being. It's perfectly acceptable. I don't know about you, but every time I made a mistake when I was a kid, we got the shit kicked out of us. And we were told we were a mistake. You should be ashamed of yourself. Oh, I am. So I'd like you to look at those 12 things over the next month. And as often as you can, I recommend daily, but reviewing this daily, but at least a few times a week, review this and see if you can integrate these things into your life. One of my favorite ones is do mirror work. Standing in front of that mirror and beginning to love yourself. I would look at myself and I would say, you're not handsome, you're too short, you're getting fat. You know, all of that stuff. I was like, knock it off. I don't deserve that. And all I'm going to do if I continue to negatively talk to myself like that, what's going to happen to me? I am going to become whatever I'm telling myself. All of the brain research shows you are what you tell yourself. If you tell yourself you're unworthy, you are going to act unworthy. These 12 things give you an opportunity to begin to change those messages that many of us have. These also are things that work with children. I met with my children every week. We had a family meeting. And I had listed on the table all 7 major feelings that I do a lecture on. Not sad, glad, fear, guilt, shame, pain. They were all written right there on the table. And each one of us would go around sharing about our week, how our week was, and feelings that we had. I wanted my children to learn to be able to identify their feelings. Feelings were never mentioned in my house growing up. Never. Most feelings were not even permitted. I wanted my children to have feelings because feelings are God-given and they allow us to grow as human beings. Every feeling is important and teaches us something. So these 12 commandments, put them on your fridge, make them available, make copies, whatever you want to do. But see if you can begin to integrate them into your life. And see if after 30 days of doing that, evaluate if it's made any difference in your life by practicing these 12 commandments. See if it has any impact on your life. Because I can tell you this, if we continue to be negative on ourselves, we continue to be harmful to who we are. Those positive affirmations that we give ourselves are absolutely imperative in our lives because we believe what we're telling ourselves. And if you're like me, growing up in a dysfunctional family, almost every message I gave myself was not helpful. I was reinforcing the negativity in my life and not enforcing the positivity. That's why giving children positive affirmations and positive messages more than negative ones is important. There were no positive affirmations in my family growing up. Was there? Did you guys always be told how wonderful you were, how bright you were, how smart you were, how wonderful you looked? No. All we heard is that when we made a mistake or screwed up, we heard how stupid we were, how we'll never amount to anything. You're always going to be like your father. You're ignorant. I had all those messages. I was very clear. And if you look at my life and how I was treating myself, I covered it up with trying to be successful. But how I was treating myself personally was awful. I would never allow anybody to treat me like I was treating myself. You couldn't talk to me that way. And yet I was doing it on a daily basis to myself. So you willing to commit to do that? It'll make a difference for you. Change the way that you talk to yourself. Change the way that you think of yourself. And your life will improve immeasurably. Continue on the same path of the negative self-talk, and life is just not going to be worth living. You'll just be surviving. And so, as a survival instructor in the military, survival's not fun. Watch those shows on TV where they're trying to survive. Do they look like they're having a good time? You know, it's miserable living life just surviving. I want to see you live and thrive and pass that on to the people that are important and that are part of your life. Because the messages that we give out to the people around us are profound and have profound impact, much more than we recognize sometimes. So if I'm positive, if I'm treating myself well, giving myself good messages, you're going to notice it. You're going to see it. And if you're practicing it, people in your life are going to see it. Now, your kids may call you weird at first. I know my son was devastated when he came out of my house one day and he looked on the mirror in my bathroom and it had all of this affirmations that I was told to write out years ago, you know, that I am an intelligent human being. And all of my affirmations, my son looked at it and he goes like, Dad, you got to be kidding. You are none of that. That's children for you. They're there to boost your self-esteem. We've gone long. I realize that. I've had you sit here for a long time today. But I want to say that I admire so much people that are willing to begin to look at themselves, look at their lives, and improve who they are as human beings is a challenge, especially in a world that we're constantly beat down and giving terrible messages about who we are. So I admire the fact that you had the courage to come here today. I admire the fact that you've been willing to do the work. And I'm extremely happy that you all are part of my life now. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I wish you all wonderful success with working on these issues in your life. Thank you.